Well, I'd like to thank the organizers and thank the previous speaker for that excellent introduction. What I wanted to tell you today was I wanted to focus on what's called our Therapy Acceleration Program, but I'm going to put it in the context of what the Leukemia Lymphoma Society has been doing for the last 65 years in research, to talk about how we have our portfolio of investing in academic research and biotech companies. So I'll tell you a little bit about the research mission. I'm going to tell you how we achieve it and the role of TAP, Therapy Acceleration Program, our new therapies for pediatric cancers, talk about the TAP as a model program, go a little bit deeper into that. So the mission is pretty simple and pretty bold. Cure leukemia, lymphoma, and myeloma, and improve the quality of life of patients and their families. We've been doing this since 1954. We've invested $1 billion since then. In fact, we just passed the marker this year. And we have funded hundreds, thousands of grants to do this. And the last 8 years have funded companies to actually move assets. We're very much focused on a therapeutic intent. While we recognize that it's important to invest in basic research, and we certainly have done that, it was pretty clear that to bridge that gap, we needed to get therapies into the clinic. And beyond that, when these therapies are there, are they the right ones? What do they do? What are the long-term consequences of these things? So we're very conscious of this. And beyond that, once the drugs are out there, to make sure that patients have access to them and are educated about them, and to advocate at the state and government level to make sure that that happens. So many of us in research come from actually the pharma industry, including myself. And we look at the opportunities to develop new therapies in a pharmaceutical way. This is a very typical way a pharmaceutical company might do it. You look at the chain of events would be to discover the target of the molecule, develop a molecule, bring the molecule into the clinic under development, and then ultimately commercialize it. And when it's commercialized, make sure that patients have access to it. It was pretty clear that our grant program was highly effective and had been done for 60 years. And we have 320 active grants running right now in 2014 globally, mostly in North America, but globally. You need to harness what comes out of those grants and actually develop therapies. And when the therapies are developed, bring them into clinical trials, principally from our end for proof of concept. Our programs are not designed to run phase 3 registration-enabling trials for the most part. They really are designed to prove a proof of concept, particularly in a rare cancer. And in fact, all blood cancers are rare cancers. And in fact, as you slice down the different types of cancers, and I'll show you that in a moment, a rare cancer becomes 10, 15 cancers. And so we really had to, in order to enable development of rare cancers, we recognized that we were going to have to get behind this and move it forward, whether that be for pediatric purposes or for rare forms of AML or myeloma. And this is what our portfolio looks like. So what you're looking at, we spend $80 million a year. That's what we did in fiscal year 14. And it's, the funding is for a variety of grant programs. And it's interesting to note that in our grant programs, the top of the list is a Career Development Award. That's a training award for basically researchers who are early on in their career. That's been a highly productive method of funding research. Those people who have been in our Career Development Program, the select few that have gotten in, turn out to come back and they run major programs 15, 20 years later. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. We've also focused heavily on our translational research program. And the idea of the translational research program is to basically support a concept in the clinic. And so you can see the therapeutic bent towards our portfolio. We have a large grant called the Specialized Center of Research. This is generally five researchers, generally across the country, for about a $6 million spend over 5 years to work on a major problem. And we have one ongoing SCORE that is run by Bill Carroll out of NYU. To look at advancing new therapies for pediatric cancers. And we've had other investments in SCORE programs that have assisted that as well. The Therapy Acceleration Program, the goal is basically to look for first-in-class opportunities, basically new ideas, new concepts, and take them from early late discovery, that is in toxicology and IND enabling, and then bring them into phase 3. And you saw that cartoon about bridging the valley of death. That's what this program is designed to do. And I'll go into that a little bit more. Let me talk about new treatments for pediatric cancers. The way we look at it is as follows. Clearly, new treatments for ALL and Hodgkin's disease, which have evolved over the last 50, 60 years, had a major impact in increased survival. And I fully recognize the 5-year survival is not the only statistic, but it's one statistic that we can measure progress against. And you can see the variety of therapies, whether that be cytotoxic, or radiation, or bone marrow transplants, or antibodies. But there are cases where there's relapse refractory failures to those therapies. That's one reason for new therapies. We've talked a lot about toxic side effects from conventional therapies. And there are long duration of therapy, that is years out when the side effects can manifest. So we have invested heavily in immunotherapy to advance new therapies, and what that translates into one of the therapies, and Greg Riemann touched on this, is chimeric antigen receptor therapy, where you basically take the T cells from patients, take the T cells out of patients, and genetically engineer them to home on the tumor cells, and those T cells will kill the tumor cells. This is a therapy that we started funding, just to give you an idea of how long it takes and what investments we've done and what risks we've taken. We invested in this in 1998. Starting in 1998, we put $20 million into that. We did that because we recognized that we needed an entirely new approach. And while this looked highly risky in 1998, and in fact, Dr. Carl June had trouble getting NIH funding for this, we invested in that, and we continue to invest to this day. That result, that investment has yielded a 90% response rate for ALL. And Emily Whitehead, and you're going to see her on the Stand Up to Cancer Ken Burns PBS video in about a month, is a long-term survivor of that. Clearly not all patients get that fantastic result, but she did. I also want to go down, if you look on the bottom left, you note that Stephen Grupp ran those trials. Dr. Grupp was a a funded investigator from our career development program who we funded beginning in 1992. And so that investment comes back 20 years later. The other new therapy that is really exciting to us, and again, instead of looking at the long-term care issues, sort of the rear-view mirror, we're looking ahead, and that is to basically release the brake of the immune system. So I told you about CAR T therapy, and that's an immune activator. The concept of releasing the brake with immunocheckpoint inhibitors has been brewing for about the last 5 years in solid tumors, and now actually is yielding really incredible results in blood cancers as well. And so for Hodgkin's lymphoma, it turns out one of these checkpoint inhibitors turns out to be PD-L1. In fact, one of the principal investigators who discovered that PD-L1 is highly expressed in Hodgkin's lymphoma turns out to be Margaret Shipp. Margaret Shipp was a Career Development Award winner going back about 20 years in the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute for a long period of time. So it turns out that Hodgkin's lymphoma cells are loaded with PD-L1. In fact, the gene is amplified. So it's a cell telling you that must be an important marker because cells don't amplify genes for no reason at all. With the advent of antibodies to PD-1 and PD-L1, which are actually developed in solid tumors, to now apply that to Hodgkin's tumors based on that knowledge, and the result was the response rate of about 60 to 85% in relapse refractory Hodgkin's disease. It clearly looks like it's going to be a new therapy for Hodgkin's disease. Whether or not it's going to have the long-term side effects, it surely will have some side effects. The long-term side effects be an improvement and a way to get around the cytotoxic therapy. We don't know yet, but it looks very promising. And I finally want to talk about BCR-ABL-like ALL. So I talked to you a little bit briefly about segments of ALL. So this map provided by Charles Mulligan takes this disease and molecularly breaks it down into many different subtypes. And it's pretty clear that this cancer and many other cancers can be molecularly broken down such that you are no longer looking at ALL, but a certain type of ALL. And in fact, BCR-ABL ALL, which comes from the experience in CML, another blood cancer from about 15 years ago, and the drugs developed for CML, can be applied and is an approved therapy for BCR-ABL, 2% of the patients of ALL that have that. Well, it turns out that through Cheryl Willman and a few others, it turns out that there's a BCR-ABL-like signature, genetic signature. And those kids that have that signature actually are also amenable to that therapy, and that's the score that we're currently funding through Bill Carroll and the recent report that came out in the New England Journal showing that Philadelphia-like ALL can be treated with these with these drugs. In fact, that's Gleevec, or Gleevec-like drugs. It's taken over 10 years to bring that type of therapy to proof of concept, and so we're pretty proud of that, and it indicates that new therapies, new small molecules, new molecular therapies to approach ALL like this are going to be important and useful. I want to switch gears and talk about the Therapy Acceleration Program. So the cartoon you just saw is more elegant than mine. What can I say? I go out on Google Images and I find the best image. I didn't find that one. But this concept of valley of death is a major problem in drug development. Drugs in early stage development are at the biggest risk of failure. And couple that with a rare disease, and you might have biotechs, and particularly big pharma, run the other direction. So recognizing that was a problem, and recognizing that in the area that we fund for rare diseases coming out of academic groups, that there needed to be a way to get these therapies and drive them into the clinic and find out if they work. 8 years ago, Lou DeGeneiro, who is CEO of LLS at the moment, set up this program called Therapy Acceleration. And so what we decided to do was to basically take our donors' money, those generous dollars, and begin to split them off in terms of grant program and therapy acceleration program. And basically bring what we saw from the bench to the bedside. And we're typically looking for early stage results in the clinic to show that an agent may work. This is proven actually in the blood cancer space quite remarkable. I told you about CAR T therapy, the early stage CAR T therapy, 90% response, early stage trial. I could talk to you about ibrutinib, where a drug that looked like, in preclinical data, looked like, well, it may work. It turns out in early stage studies for patients with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, that drug is highly effective. So it read out in terms of not only safety, but efficacy in early stage trials. And I can go down the list in terms of blood cancers. That has repeatedly happened. So that was the hope. Bring it into the clinic, demonstrate that it has activity, demonstrate it could hit the target, demonstrate that it has efficacy, and then leverage that to have a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company pick it up. We also do have returns contemplated to fund future research. That's an important concept to us. These trials are moderately expensive, and if we want to run 5 or 10 or 20 of these things at once, we're going to need funds to do this. And that can come from donor dollars, but we also want to harvest the success, if we can get them, and plow that back, basically making a green venture, if you will, to plow that money back into future research. So the Therapy Acceleration Program really was targeting 4 different types of programs. Something called a Biotech Accelerator, which is basically generally a $50-50 partnership with a biotech company that has an interesting idea. We look at about 60 new opportunities a year from biotechnology companies to evaluate internally whether this is something we want to fund. We make use of our experts in the field through our academic grants to reach out to them and ask whether this is an important therapy and a promising therapy, and then we will fund those biotechnology companies. For an academic investigator, we will fully fund the opportunity. So in other words, we will take an opportunity, for example, coming out of Mark Fortini's group at Columbia, and we will pay to make the drug, pay to run the toxicology studies, pay to prepare the IND, and hand it back to Mark Fortini and say, go run the clinical trials. And so we can basically leverage academia along with our expertise in drug development and use outside companies to basically make those happen. We also have some special clinical programs, and I'll tell you about that one, and I'll tell you about some of the special initiatives. All totaled, in the 8 years we've been running the program, we've had 47 partnerships. We currently have 25 active, and we've invested $80 million in this approach. That approach has been across a variety of phases of drugs, including phase 3 all the way down. You can see most of the opportunities in phase 1, phase 2 opportunities, and have worked with a variety of companies. I wanted to point out that Epizyme, we invested in Epizyme when it had an early stage so-called DOT1L inhibitor. It's an epigenetic controller. We invested in that company when it was a preclinical asset because we thought it was an interesting, novel approach that nobody else was doing. They basically brought that drug into the clinic and now have partnered that program with Celgene. So that is an example of success. And I'll mention the opportunity with Michigan in a moment. So I'm going to feature 2 programs. I'm going to talk about one for something called menin-MLL. This is a small molecule inhibitor that actually started in our grant programs. It's designed for patients who have this translocation, and it's found in ALL, and it's highly prevalent actually in infant ALL and also AML. So this program started on our grant program. It moved to our we brought it into the Therapy Acceleration Program and supported University of Michigan to basically get a company to make hundreds of molecules, hand them back to Michigan, and ask to optimize the molecule. We've just now taken that program and now brought it into an emerging biotechnology company called Cura Oncology to basically do the toxicology programs and advance that into the clinic. So there's an example of funding of a rare translocation for ALL, AML, and we can drive that into the clinic. We also have a program that we've partnered with Dana-Farber. It's something called Blood Cancer Research Program, where Dana-Farber is running trials from Dana-Farber as a hub, but going out into the community to advance those trials. And what that's done is allow Dana-Farber to run multiple trials at once with the Dana-Farber expertise and oversight, and increase enrollment to about 50 to 100%. All total, when you look at the grant program and TAP program, these are the drugs that come out of it. And you can see some of the drugs in stars are drugs that have made it and gotten approved, and many other drugs that are moving through the clinic, some of them which were achieved breakthrough therapy by the FDA. While we do academic research, we also are very cognizant that we need to get the drugs to patients as well, and so we have a whole system to work with the government, third-party payers, healthcare professionals, and patients to advance that. In fact, we have 60,000 calls per year that come into our Information Resource Center for blood cancers. So in summary, I think we're making good progress towards cures for blood cancers. Clearly not enough, and there's a large road ahead. We think immunoactivations therapy, whether that be to take the brakes off or to step on the gas, if you will, for ALL and Hodgkin's looks very promising in the near future. It also is promising for a variety of other blood cancers for adults. The Therapy Acceleration Program has been a good model to advance opportunities, particularly for rare cancers. We would like to expand that opportunity to a venture philanthropy fund, which is actually going to require additional dollars to do that as well, with the concept of feeding back to the society so we can run more programs like it. Overall, what's happening in the blood cancer space is truly remarkable. For those of you who don't follow it as closely as we do, the opportunities for leukemia, lymphoma, and myeloma have never been more richer, and we're seeing increases in survival, not in terms of months, but in terms of years, and that gives us a lot of hope that we're actually going to get cures for some of these diseases, not for 5 years, but forever, and beyond that, to achieve those with an excellent quality of life. So I thank you for your attention.